So continuing to build up that second piece, you can see a little area there where I drew out a notch for the cord of the filter to go. Now if you've got a custom cage, you can obviously drill a hole or something for the cord to fit through. There's some cages you can put it up through the top and cover up that cord with leaves or vines or something. So just kind of digging away at it to avoid having all those straight lines, try to make it look more organic. Now this is something, the hide, the section I cut away from the floor to raise it up, it would be strong enough without a support beam, which is what I'm doing here, but it kind of looked ridiculous just hovering in midair. So I went ahead and cut out this little support beam to make it look more realistic. Now here I'm creating a little box. I'm not sure why I did this, but it's really just to block out some space, because later what I ended up using was that great stuff expanding foam, just to build up the landscape, have it look more organic. Plus I'd never used it before, so this is really, that box was just to block out some space so I don't use that much foam, or else I would have been buying can after can of the great stuff expanding foam. Here is the great stuff expanding foam. So you got to shake the can really well. I'm protected by a smock, gloves, glasses, and a mask. This is stuff, if you get it on your clothing, it's not good. Trying to work with it with a spoon, there's definitely a learning curve to using this stuff. Somewhat difficult to get used to, but you can build up a nice looking organic landscape with the stuff. And it is great. So again, trying to use the spoon to move the stuff around. Very sticky. Once it dries, this is dried I think for about 30 hours. You can cut it away very easily with a knife. So you can go back into it and carve away, trying to make it look more distinctive. Because there's really no rhyme or reason when you put this stuff down. It's difficult to direct. Forgot to put in the little area where the second falls is going to happen. So that area is a little bit lower than those top ridges around that first pond. This is a little thing I created to easily pick this up, put it anywhere. Shows me where the water lines have to be, shows me where the ridges have to be of each pond to be able to contain the level of water that will be in each pond. So I think I went with about a little less than 2 inches deep for the first pond and about 2.5 inches deep for the second. So using more of the great stuff, trying to build up that ridge, because I know it has to be of a certain height to be able to handle the level of water going in there. Ended up using I think 1.5 cans of this stuff. So it is a one use only. Once you've used it, the nozzle will clog. So keep that in mind when you're working with this stuff. So continuing to check the levels of the ridges to make sure it's going to be tall enough. As you can see, it's kind of random where I'm putting this stuff. There's no real artistry going on at this stage anyway. And when this dries, again, this is dried for another 30 hours to make sure it's hard. There'll be a lot of pieces that are weak, that are sharp, pieces that you can just pull off with your fingers. You want to get rid of those. And what I tried to do for the actual ponds is tried to make them a little smoother, because I knew I was going to have to press silicone into all of these areas, and I didn't want it to be too textured. This stuff is pretty hard. Here's where some stuff has spilled over. You can just cut that away. Decided to put a couple of rocks in the second pond. The second pond is going to be a little deeper, so just as a safety precaution, if a pet is struggling for some reason, they can grab a hold of that. There's a ton of little areas where there'll be gaps. I'm going to try to patch all those up before I grout this thing. So at one point I ran out of great stuff, so going back to using the styrofoam to build up that ridge. That part of the ridge wasn't quite tall enough, so ended up going back and forth. Doing a little more carving here. And this is something, if you're going to do this, the carving after the fact, you want to make sure you make some fairly distinctive deep cuts, meaning you do not want to do any fine detail as far as cutting away this stuff, because it's just going to be covered up by the grout. All of the layers of grout, which I used 3, will cover up any fine detail that I would have done as far as cutting this stuff. You can see here with the second piece, the piece that's covering up the filter, I left some space for each piece to grow, because when you add those layers of grout, it's going to grow in size, it's going to grow in weight, and you've got to leave a little room for it to grow. It's very easy to keep adding to. It's very difficult to take away if it's too big. Using non-sanded white grout here, adding a little water. You want to mix this to the consistency of like thin pancake batter. So you do not want it watery. So this is quite a bit thicker than water. What I did here first was just add grout, 1 layer to all the areas that are going to be submerged in water. Put it in a bathtub. I got a little level there, make sure it's like a realistic test. And did a test just to make sure the thing worked, make sure it was flowing right. I didn't want to get the entire thing done and then have it look terrible and then have to go back. So this is definitely the stage to get this test over with. And what I learned is the waterfall didn't really look that good. It needed a ridge for the water to fall over. Instead, what it's doing here is kind of cascading down those 2 falls. So I created a little protrusion, I guess ridge, for the water to fall over, just so it would be a little more visually appealing. And I probably should have done more, created a larger piece in each area, because the final product you can just barely tell. So continuing to put that first layer of grout on after that test. It was kind of difficult to get the grout to stick to the great stuff, but keep trying and it'll eventually stick on there. So I got a full layer of grout on there, finally let it dry for like 24 hours. And this is something I do, especially with a big project like this, put a lot of acrylic into the second layer. Just any color will do. This is just so I'll know where I left off, because it is inevitable that I would be called away from this project. It's so big. So I go back the next day, maybe it's the next week, and I know exactly where I left off because of the different color. And sometimes you'll have to introduce gravity to certain areas, so there's not as much of a mess, or sometimes it's easier to apply the grout when you've got the structure propped up in some sort of way. I put the 3 layers on the top first before I turned it over to put the 3 layers on the bottom. So yeah, you do want to cover it all, every single inch of it, with 3 layers. Mixing up some very thick grout so it's like the consistency of clay. And this is a way of, if you want to put on more detail, if you want the rocks to protrude more, be more distinctive. And that is the end of part 2. Now watch part 3.